Hey, brilliant thinkers of the void. Before we dive into the chilling truth about why Earth's savage species failed, smash that like button, share your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more galaxy-spanning narratives. Let's get into the deep cut. The immense lecture hall aboard the Ethelred station, a nexus of interstellar academia, hummed with the soft, expectant resonance of a dozen species. Its polished ferroceramic floor reflected the tiered seats occupied by creatures of every conceivable morphology. The iridescent, cautious forms of the Cthar, whose multiple limbs perpetually articulated minor anxieties. The diminutive, crystalline Scylar, clustered together like static energy. And the colossal, placid Grok, whose slow, rhythmic breathing suggested deep, unshakable serenity. Seated unobtrusively in a back corner, almost fading into the utilitarian gray of the bulkhead, was Cale Roran, the single human representative. Physically, he was an anomaly in this gathering, lacking the multispectral vision of the Scylar or the innate resilience of the Grok. He was simply compact, bipedal, and deceptively still, a quiet observer perpetually underestimated by his peers. The focus of the audience's attention was Professor Xyler, a luminary in the field of exoevolutionary collapse. Xyler, a proud citizen of the high-gravity world of Xylos, possessed 6 obsidian eyes and scales that shimmered faintly with residual tectonic energy, embodying the robust, slightly overweening confidence of his civilization. He adjusted the voluminous shawl of his academic robes with a flourish that signaled both authority and performance, and the room fell into a reverent silence. His topic, emblazoned across the massive holographic screen in glowing script, was The Great Filter and the Extinction of Early Tier 4 Civilizations. Xyler's deep, rumbling voice, amplified by the station systems, carried an unmistakable undertone of intellectual superiority as he began dissecting the failures of species that possessed what he termed hyper-aggressive developmental trajectories. He spoke of planets with volatile tectonic structures, high atmospheric pressures, and biological profiles characterized by endemic, perpetual conflict, worlds, he posited, that were evolutionarily destined to self-destruct before achieving stellar maturity. Then, with calculated dramatic effect, he transitioned the display to a rotating blue and white globe marred by swirling cloud systems. We turn now, Xyler intoned, the word dripping with practiced academic scorn, to the classification designated by the tragically short-lived universal consensus as Tier 12 Death World. Observe the data. He displayed graphs showing wildly fluctuating global temperatures, the terrifying density of the planet's megafauna history, and the shocking internal aggression metrics of the dominant sentient species, Homo sapiens. He detailed the species' inherent need for conflict, their resource-driven wars, and their chilling capacity for self-annihilation via crude atomic weaponry. Their evolutionary strategy, Xyler summarized, his 6 eyes sweeping the room, was one of constant, zero-sum competition, creating psychological and social frameworks entirely incompatible with sustained galactic cooperation. He paused, a slight, almost imperceptible tremor running through his scales, a sign of the deep satisfaction his pronouncement brought him. He fixed his gaze briefly on Cale in the back row, a deliberate rhetorical gesture. Deathworlders are long extinct, the professor smirked, the words a dismissive, surgical cut. The sole surviving specimen, Cale Roran, you see among us is merely a genetic anomaly, a biological fragment thoroughly domesticated by the pervasive comforts and safeguards of interstellar society. Their inherent danger made their survival against each other an impossibility. The evolutionary imperative of constant conflict proved to be their final, insurmountable filter. Cale, having endured this specific, patronizing assessment countless times, remained externally placid. His stillness, however, belied a rapidly accelerating internal awareness. While the rest of the lecture hall absorbed the professor's arrogance, Cale's uniquely honed human senses were quietly monitoring environmental data the other species instinctively ignored. The Cthar student seated 2 rows ahead was exhibiting a faint, erratic tremor that went beyond typical Cthar nervousness. Simultaneously, Cale's nose, sensitive to complex organic molecules, registered a faint, acrid scent underlying the sterile air filtration, a pungent mix of adrenaline-induced fear sweat and something musky, something profoundly primal. He also noted a subtle, subaudible vibration, a low-frequency thrum that the aliens likely processed as benign, station hum. The thrum suddenly deepened, morphing into a sharp, grinding jolt that rattled the lecture hall's acoustic paneling. Emergency lighting, a subdued, pulsing red, immediately augmented the main illumination. Professor Zeiler, momentarily thrown off his prepared script, stammered a dismissal. A minor power fluctuation, nothing more, students. Continue to remain orderly. But Cale knew better. The acrid scent was intensifying, mingling now with an earthy, metallic tang. He could feel the low-frequency vibration not just through his feet, but resonating in his chest cavity. The anomaly Zeiler had dismissed was escalating into an immediate, biological imperative. Cale's predator-prey senses, dormant for years, violently snapped back into focus, recognizing the unmistakable signature of a severe, uncontained threat nearby. A high-pitched, synthetic shriek tore through the sudden hush of the lecture hall, instantly overriding Zeiler's flustered commands. Containment breach. Containment breach in the Xenofauna Research Bay, Level 3. Specimen 74A, SK Theory Predator, is uncontained. All non-essential personnel are to move immediately to Secure Zone Gamma. The robotic voice of the station AI repeated the warning, its cold authority only serving to amplify the burgeoning terror. The mention of the SK Theory Predator ignited a visceral, species-specific panic. This creature, infamous across known space for its sheer killing efficiency and terrifying intelligence, was a perfect apex hunter from a hyperdense jungle environment. Its capture had been a monumental multi-species effort, and its supposed, secure, status was the only thing preventing widespread fear of the Xenofauna Research Bay. Now it was loose. The organized retreat Zeiler had demanded immediately collapsed into a chaotic, multi-species stampede. The enormous, normally tranquil grok species, whose size required them to move slowly, became immovable obstacles, blocking the main egress points with their sheer bulk. The crystalline Sylar, instead of fleeing, began emitting ultrasonic fear chirps that instantly scrambled the internal communication systems, replacing critical tactical information with a high-frequency wall of noise. Even Professor Zeiler, the high-gravity authority on evolutionary hardiness, was frozen. His 6 eyes flickered rapidly between the flashing exit signs and his precious data console, his superior intellect failing him entirely in the face of raw, immediate danger. He was prioritizing data recovery over survival, a purely academic response to a biological problem. Cale's reaction was precisely the opposite. His heart rate, rather than spiking, settled into a low, controlled rhythm. The fear smell and the deep thrumming vibrations were no longer background noise, they were directional data. While the advanced aliens around him were programmed for either systematic retreat or technical defense, Cale's Deathworlder genetics were activating a crucial override: management of immediate threat. He did not perceive the creature as a monster to be fled, but as a dangerous, confused variable that had to be controlled. The panic of his peers was not helping. They were simply radiating high-energy fear, which Cale knew would act like a dinner bell to the disoriented SK Theory. Cutting through the pandemonium required absolute focus. Cale used his voice, a low, resonant baritone that carried authority without threat, to pierce the din. Quiet. Sylar, damp down the frequency. Kthar, form an orderly file, move along the side walls, not the center. He didn't ask. He commanded, the sheer, unexpected confidence of the small biped momentarily halting the most erratic behavior. Utilizing the spatial awareness honed by millions of years of navigating complex, dangerous biomes, Cale began herding the most panicked students away from the jammed main doors and toward a secondary, lesser-used utility exit near the comms center. He needed centralized control, and that meant moving toward the source of the danger, not away from it. As Cale led his small, reluctant procession through the rapidly darkening corridors, the station was enacting automated energy conservation measures. They were met by the terrible evidence of the creature's speed. A section of plasteel wall had been torn open, not with brute force but with a rapid, surgical strike. A sickly, sweet odor of alien blood confirmed an attack. Kale rounded the corner of a dimly lit maintenance access junction, placing himself between the others and the unknown, and instantly saw the manifestation of the predator. It was immense, low-slung, and impossibly fast. The SK-Theory was a grotesque tapestry of muscle, chitinous plating, and razor-sharp claws. Its massive head was dominated by multiple thermal pits and two enormous bioluminescent eyes that glowed with furious, trapped desperation. It was utilizing the shadows and maintenance infrastructure perfectly, a blurred movement that only Kale's enhanced optical processing could track effectively. It was already in a full charge, aiming not for Kale, but for a small, frozen Kthar student who had strayed from the group. Without hesitation, Kale committed to the instinctual, aggressive defense born of countless earthly encounters. He didn't reach for a weapon or a console. He launched himself laterally, shoving the multi-limbed Kthar violently clear of the attack trajectory. The SK-Theory's elongated foreclaw, missing its intended target, instead ripped a foot-long furrow in the reinforced plasteel wall where the student had been standing. The proximity of the attack, the sheer, crushing kinetic force that echoed through the structure, silenced the remaining desperate cries of the aliens behind Kale. They had seen the professor's tamed anomaly disregard his own safety to intervene, and they had witnessed, firsthand, the blinding speed and predatory efficiency of an animal far beyond their academic classifications. The Deathworlder had confronted the beast, and now the creature's confused, terrifying gaze was fixed directly on him. The air in the narrow maintenance corridor became thick with the SK-Theory's musky, territorial scent, a smell that simultaneously signaled fear and dominance. Kale held his position, his back now pressed against the cold plasteel, the gouges left by the creature's claws still radiating heat next to his head. He ignored the frantic whispers of the aliens cowering behind the sealed junction door and focused entirely on the predator before him. The SK-Theory's massive body was coiled, its tail whipping erratically against the floor, a clear indicator of severe distress, not confidence. This was a cornered animal, exponentially more dangerous than one on a confident hunt. The security forces, meanwhile, were compounding the crisis. Kale could hear the scrambled comms chatter of the station's automated response system. Prioritize Sector B12 lockdown. Report a visual in Cargo Bay 4. Deploying stun drones to Level 2. They were reactive, not predictive, always moving to where the creature had been, not where it was going. They were fighting a tactical war against a strategic biological threat. Kale's earth-forged mind instantly rejected this approach. This was not a military exercise. It was an ecological interaction. Just then, Kale's attention was drawn to a choked, panicky voice filtering through the closed junction door. It was Professor Zyler, attempting to communicate with security through his personal comlink. I demand immediate assistance. I am still receiving critical data packets. Focus the pursuit away from the server core. His intellectual arrogance was now an active liability, his loud, stressed voice and his insistence on data over silent evasion serving as a powerful sonic beacon. Kale realized the SK-Theory was moving, not lunging but shifting its bulk, subtly orienting toward the source of high-frequency noise and stress hormones emanating from Zyler's hiding spot. The creature was being pulled by the professor's panic. Kale knew he had seconds to override the hunting impulse before the SK-Theory breached the thin junction door. He needed a way to interrupt its fixation without engaging in a physical confrontation that he couldn't win. He remembered the SK-Theory's xenobiological profile, an ambush predator whose aggression was fundamentally tied to defending its territory and securing high-calorie protein. In the alien environment of the station, the creature was starving and confused, looking for a predictable pattern to exploit. Spotting a sealed cryostorage locker marked nutrient blocks low grade, Kale moved with a sudden, controlled burst of speed. He ripped the heavy seal, revealing dull, dense gray cubes, a poor substitute for meat, but a recognized caloric source. The noise of the seal breaking drew the SK-Theory's full, furious attention. Its reptilian maw opened in a silent snarl of challenge. Kale did not panic. Instead, he executed a classic Earth predator management maneuver. He reached into the locker, grabbed a fistful of blocks and with a low, deliberate grunt, threw them down a long, dark, and used side corridor parallel to the junction. The blocks clattered loudly, skidding to a halt deep in the shadowed passage, simulating the sound and promise of a small, fleeing food source. Crucially, he made the noise of the potential prey louder than the noise of Xyler's actual fear. The Escatheri's 6 eyes darted between the silent, unmoving biped and the loud, promising clatter. The predator's hunting matrix was momentarily stalled, caught between the known threat, the human, and the immediate caloric reward, the blocks. Kale used that tiny hesitation to kick a piece of loose conduit toward the junction door as a final diversion, signaling to Xyler, "Be silent." He then turned his full, unwavering gaze back onto the enormous creature. The Escatheri, its head lowered, its muscled shoulders tensing and relaxing, was no longer looking for prey. It was assessing Kale, calculating why this small, vulnerable thing was not running, but standing its ground and actively attempting to dictate the terms of the encounter. Kale had successfully steered the confrontation from a hunt to a standoff, leaving the panicked professor behind a secure door while he placed himself, the Deathworlder, squarely in the path of the beast. The Escatheri predator loomed, a symphony of latent aggression and overwhelming physiological capacity. It emitted a deep, breathy hiss, a sound more related to pressure equalization than threat, but its posture was pure menace, low, wide, ready to spring. Kale, however, remained absolutely still, the small human profile presenting a biological puzzle the creature's ancient hunting instincts couldn't immediately process. He knew that any move, run, fight, or even a sudden shift in weight, would trigger the animal's programmed response. Kale's brain, working in high definition, analyzed the creature's musculature. The tail, which had been whipping in frantic distress, now moved in slow, deliberate oscillations, a clear sign of confusion replacing panic. The massive, triple-jointed forelegs were planted, not poised. The creature wasn't attacking. It was performing a detailed risk assessment of the only entity that hadn't fled. Kale's response was not to draw a weapon, but to make himself knowable. He spread his hands wide, turning his palms toward the predator, a gesture of absolute, unarmed transparency universally understood by high-level apex life. A sign that the current situation was not about killing but communication. He took a single infinitesimally slow step forward, a calculated transgression of the creature's personal boundary, then stopped. He maintained unwavering visual lock with the Escatheri's immense, multifaceted eyes. This direct, non-aggressive eye contact was the linchpin of Earth's predator management. It signaled focus and control, replacing the panicked avoidance that animals were conditioned to exploit. Kale began to speak, his voice deliberately low, rhythmic, and devoid of sharp, high frequencies. He repeated a meaningless, resonant syllable in a soothing cadence, an ancient auditory pattern designed not for intellectual comprehension, but for calming the sympathetic nervous system of a large, stressed animal. He was treating the terrifying xenofauna exactly as a ranch hand treats a spooked herd bull. The Escatheri shifted its weight, a low, guttural rumble vibrating in its throat. It was attempting to categorize Kale, as competitor, as prey, or as irrelevant, and failing on all accounts. The environment was the key. Kale recognized that the sterile silence of the station corridors was the creature's primary stressor. It was an unnatural vacuum to a jungle hunter dependent on a cacophony of background noise for security. Quickly, Kale manipulated his personal comm unit. Avoiding the high-frequency alien panic, he transmitted a recording he kept for personal meditation. A loop of low-frequency Earth white noise, specifically the deep, rolling sound of a turbulent ocean coastline mixed with the distant, heavy rainfall of a tropical storm. The effect was profound, immediate, and utterly captivating. The relentless, primal Earth rumble, completely outside the hearing spectrum of the other aliens, washed over the corridor. It was the sound of natural chaos, the constant background threat that, ironically, signaled systemic stability to a Deathworld-evolved nervous system. The Escatheri's agitated tail instantly stilled. Its immense head lowered further, its bioluminescent eyes dimming slightly as its focus shifted inward, processing the unexpected primal familiarity of the sound. The creature's terror-driven panic began to yield to a deep, evolutionary recognition. Kale seized the moment, maintaining his steady rhythmic tone. He took one final deliberate step forward, planting his feet firmly in the middle of the corridor, and slowly pointed toward the nutrient blocks he had thrown down the dark passage earlier. He signaled a single quiet command with his eyes: "Eat. Be safe. The hunt is over." The SK-Theory released a soft, shuddering breath, a sound that carried the residual weight of its former panic, and slowly, cautiously, diverted its massive body. It ignored the human entirely, its predatory focus broken, and began padding toward the low-grade nutrient blocks, its aggressive posture dissolving into one of simple, contained relief. The human calmed the predator not through superior strength or technology, but through the deep, intuitive understanding of fear honed over millennia on a planet defined by relentless, intelligent danger. Kale subtly tapped his wrist, a prearranged signal for the hidden security team to move in with the non-lethal stasis net. The standoff was over, but the implication of Kale's actions was just beginning to ripple through the silent station. The final, silent thump of the stasis net hitting the floor signaled the climax, but the true impact was psychological. As the automated security crew, hesitant and wide-eyed, moved in to secure the quiescent SK-Theory, the hushed corridors of the Ethelred station became the stage for a paradigm shift. Kale Roran, the unassuming human anomaly, stepped away from the massive, breathing hulk, his face showing only the residual strain of high focus, not exhaustion. The assembled aliens, security personnel, academic staff, and terrified students, did not rush forward to praise him. They simply stared, their comprehension systems struggling to reconcile the event with their established biological tenets. They had witnessed a direct application of evolutionary mastery that transcended their intellectual classifications. Professor Zyler emerged from the maintenance junction, his 6 eyes wide and darting, his scales dull with shock. The reptilian academic, moments ago the master of cosmic history and the dismissal of failed species, now seemed diminished, physically smaller than Kale. He approached slowly, the rigid structure of his scientific certainty crumbling around him. "Roran," Zyler rasped, his voice unsteady, that was luck. Statistical improbability. The creature was merely sated by the proximity of the nutrient blocks. His attempt to cling to rationalization was weak, a futile barrier against the truth that had just saved his life. Kale turned, his composure absolute. He met Zyler's gaze without challenge, but with a quiet, authoritative knowledge of one who has experienced the core of survival. "It wasn't luck, Professor," Kale said, his voice level. "It was control. Your security protocols failed because you treated the SK-Theory as a rogue element, a malfunction in the system. I treated it as an animal, stressed, isolated, and seeking stability. You defined its species by its capacity for violence. We defined ourselves on Earth by the capacity for management of that violence, both external and internal." He gestured toward the immobilized predator. Its fear was magnetic, attracting chaos. My comm was an unfamiliar frequency that offered a path back to primal safety, reinforced by the low-frequency noise of a planet that taught us how to stand still when everything else is trying to kill you. This was Kale's true moment of character revelation. He wasn't just a survivor, he was a master interpreter of the universal language of threat. His quiet demeanor wasn't domestication as Zyler claimed, but a state of hyper-optimized readiness, the calm before the storm ingrained in the human species. The other aliens, particularly the perceptive Kthar who had felt Kale's initial, silent command, understood the profound difference. Kale hadn't suppressed his fear. He had used it as fuel for focus, turning panic into surgical decision-making. The professor sagged, the admission evident in the way his rigid posture finally relaxed. The grand narrative of his life's work, that Deathworlders were genetically self-destructive, had been utterly refuted by the presence of a single, centered man. "The filter," Zyler murmured, a realization dawning in his 6 eyes, "was never the violence itself, it was the requirement to evolve beyond pure reaction. The climax of the story wasn't the capture, but the transference of understanding." Zyler, utterly broken from his former arrogance, slowly turned to face the remaining personnel, not as a lecturer but as a student. He announced his intention to rewrite his entire thesis, acknowledging the necessity of including human evolutionary psychology, the ability to find calm amidst existential threat, as a unique and powerful path to interstellar survival. Kale, satisfied that the immediate danger was contained and the lesson delivered, slipped away from the awestruck crowd. He sought refuge near a viewport, gazing out at the star field. He knew the galaxy would continue to misunderstand Earth, seeing only the savagery of its past. But today, one human had demonstrated the control required to survive that past. He was the product of a planet that demanded absolute perfection just to reach adulthood, and that perfection was not in the killing stroke, but in the decision not to make it. Kale watched Xyler in the distance, already animatedly discussing the new parameters of his research, and smiled slightly. The lecture was over, and the galaxy had just received its first true lesson from the Deathworlder who was supposedly long extinct. His quiet life on the Ethelred was permanently altered. He was no longer an anomaly but a vital, terrifying resource.